Hello, how are you doing?
Hello. How are you?
Good, thank you. Okay, let me share screen on Zoom so I can.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing? Okay, so this week we are gonna work on a few things. Hopefully, we'll be able to touch on a little bit of wireless networking along with using some Kali Linux. My original intention was to have you set up a wireless router and then see if you can attack it, but I just didn't have time to really span it out, but we can probably revisit that topic later when we talk about ethical hacking. So I'll plan it out a little bit better for the future week where we can put together a network and be able to see what we can do with it. So in this week, we are going to cover some of the appliances and security appliances. As last week, we talked about the network technology and devices. Okay. So we are going to touch on some intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system. We'll talk about wireless security and what we need to look at, especially when we are dealing with devices or mobile devices. So to start, in chapter 4, it begins talking about Wholespace intrusion detection, your HIDS. And this, when it's saying Wholespace, that means that it could be protecting your critical files on your operating system, right? On your Windows or Linux or Mac OS. And the Wholespace intrusion detection system, and in the name, when it's a detection system, it's gonna need to detect any kind of threat. So that means that it needs to monitor traffic, okay? It also helps you prevent malware. So you see some of your security applications that you download or purchase license for, that's gonna be very close to this. So it elevates the security by allowing you to monitor the application and protect local resources. Hi, we're looking at the notes in the assignment for Unit 4. So now detection is a very reactive approach. It is not preventative, meaning that as it happens, we're going to be able to see it. So a detection system is good internally. It's also sometimes we will put it right at the edge of our network, but it is not good in preventative or protection. Okay, so we would use it to monitor the activity or sometimes internal threat. Like that could be your employees or things that already exist inside your network. Okay. Now, the network-based intrusion detection system, your NIDS, it's also a monitoring type of appliance. It's looking at the activity, but the network intrusion detection system, it's going to be able to give you the overall monitoring and analysis. So it's going to overlook the network and your infrastructure. Okay. So as the attack happens, it's going to detect the attack. And it uses, we have to monitor our ports and our traffic, right? Our network overall. So the difference between a Wholespace and a network base is the network base overlooks the entire larger scale network, where the Wholespace, it's particular to that system. So it could be for the server, like the application server, or a database, or something more on the individual level where the network is going to be monitoring in a much larger scale, right? And that could be an appliance or something. In the Wholespace case, sometimes that could be a software. So it could be a hardware or it could be a software. Most people would prefer to have an appliance as it would have more feature. However, right, with that would require resources and so on. So in the chapter, we need to answer the question, the difference between your IDS and an IPS, and we'll get to that. So you have to understand the specifics, right? an intrusion detection system, it detects threats by looking at traffic, ports, right? Potential issues. And that could be from the analysis historically that we derive from the past and the definition of what a threat would be, right? Anything that's anomaly outside of what your regular activity would be, or it could be heuristic where it would be behavior. So in the appliance, sometimes they would put in the specific details, right? If you have a search in ICMP Echo, right? And we talked about protocols last week where if we have a huge amount of ping coming through our network, then possibly that might be a denial of service that's happening, right? Somebody can ping us and require that. But the difference between an IDS and an IPS is that the IPS prevent, right? It is more preventative compared to the IDS. The IDS is a reactive system, where the IPS is a preventative system.
IPS is a reactive system.
And IPS is the preventative system. So when we say preventative, what does it mean? It's gonna block potential attack, right? Whereas the intrusion detection system, it sees and monitors the attack. It does not block. So it's like putting a camera on the freeway and looking at the traffic is the IDS, right? It's looking at all the cars that are passing through, and potentially if we're looking for a car that could harm everybody, right, it would raise an alarm, okay? Where the IPS is like putting a police officer, right, standing at the roadway and then prevent people that could harm other people from passing through. So the IPS is, it's gonna block, right, based on the definition or the behavior of your traffic, okay? So now when you buy these devices, you're gonna come across a few things. Sometimes devices are false positive and sometimes devices are false negative. All technology has this issue, right? So if I buy an appliance, whether it's from Cisco or Fortinet, or, you know, there are many companies that produce security appliance. If an appliance is false positive, right, it's gonna alert on an event that is non-threatening or harmless. It's like little kid crying wolf, right? So it sees everybody as wolves, okay? So when it's false positive, it's gonna raise an alert even when it's not threatening. So in that case, what will happen is the administrator has to go and check every single alarm that's gonna go off, right? So the false positive is kind of like the false house alarm, right? No fire, nothing, right? But it still sound off because it's very sensitive, okay? The false negative is when it does not detect attack. So in my opinion, and this is just common sense too, right? We would rather choose a false positive than a false negative, right? Because you might have 10 alarms that are going off about your network, and you can go through those. It is a little bit granular and a little bit of work, but you rather have the alarm than nothing at all, right? So in the false negative, when attacks happen, it's not going to be able to detect it, okay? Now, they benchmark all of these devices, so they'll tell you in the specification the percentage, right? There's always a margin of error. So normally we want to look for something that's below 5%, but also you can also build up the statistic by implementing the, you know, your test network before you roll them in, okay? So there are many ways that we can be able to control these devices. So before we move to the next few questions, let's take a look at your notes. So here it shows you, now if you take a look at these diagrams, right? So ultimately, when you're looking at a server room or in a data center, right, things on the rack, there's nothing spread out about it, right? but we have to illustrate it on a logical diagram on how things would be, okay? So when you're looking at the internet and beyond, this is where after it leaves the router, right? The router is the appliance that's gonna bring your traffic in and out. Just like at home, you need your wireless router to get to the internet. So the public network is considered everything beyond this point. So beyond this point, it's gonna be your internet service provider, right? So for example, if I subscribe to AT&T, right, they give me a modem / router. Beyond that point is AT&T network and other people's network that makes up the internet. Then on the rack, okay, coming in from the router, right, we gotta connect the firewall. So on the router, as I showed you last week, there's only a couple of ports, and we have to connect that to a switch, right? Which is going to be connecting to an appliance that looks like that's for firewall. So the firewall is basically, it's a filtering system. So why do I need to place it right there after the router? That's an edge firewall. Why do I need to put the firewall there? Let's think about it, right? Why do you put gates in front of your house or doors? Yeah, at least screen, right? You can close the door on the people who you don't want to come into your house, so you block it, right? So most cases, you're gonna see an edge firewall that's right there, right at the entrance, and before it's leaving, okay? Because you do have internal threat people who are leaking, right? So security number, credit card, all of that from the inside, right? So you have that there. Now, here they put the sensors, and those are going to be simply attaching to your appliance, which is through a switch, right? You connect another port, that cable goes to the switch, and those sensors are just basically appliance that's going to sound off. Think of it like alarm system, right? Like at home, if you have like a security alarm system, you have all of these camera, right? If one of them activates to somebody, a potential intruder, it's going to sound off. So you want to kind of place the sensor across. Why am I not just putting it in the front and the back, right? I need to put it in the middle because there are different part of my network that will be handling different things, such as, right, we might have a couple servers on the inside for authentication, you know, for file sharing, for different things, okay? But ultimately, physically, you would see this just on one or two racks, like the back. Okay. Question? Let's take a look at the second one so you see if you can read. Now, in network design, it's so important in security, right? So here, if you take a look at the picture, okay, you have some stuff that's in between. And this is common. So you have the internet, which is like I said, so to connect this network and that network to the left and the right, you need two routers, right? Because the way that we treat the DMZ is beyond our network, right? It's kind of like an extension of our network, but in order to get into our network, we need to route it in. The router allows us to connect to external network that's not part of ours. So what we can do is we can treat the database and the web server as not truly part of our network. So what I would do, right? So here's the internet, that's my service provider and everybody else, right? This point to the right is your internal network, what the companies own. This point to the left, it still belongs to the company, but this is the DMZ. It's actually seen publicly. People can visit the web server to access their website, right? They can use the database to upload files and so on. So when you're connecting this, you would have a router here, and two firewalls. So this, what you create is what's called DMZ. This is public, this is visible to the public, but you want to protect this, okay? because if you don't, they take down your web server, your database, and everything else. So we put a network intrusion detection system here, right? So I would attach my firewall to my router on a switch, right? And that switch, I would attach a network intrusion detection system. Okay. And then how do I bridge it into the network? Well, it has to route through another router, right? So we treat this as a separate network. That's as external. This is our internal network. And we will put a couple of intrusion detection on the inside. See how they don't use the prevention system here? So if you implement the solution for this, you would need to put an IPS on here. Where would you put it? So we have 3 network intrusion detection systems. Those are just, think of it like an alarm system, right? If somebody enter your network, it sounds off. If somebody cause any kind of problem, it sounds off. But when it sounds off, it's already late, right? So where can I add the prevention?
Firewall?
Yeah, right there at the gate. Okay, that's common. Where else? What's the essential core of the business? Depends, right? If I'm an e-commerce website like Amazon, what's my essential core of my business?
Web server?
The front, which is the public facing, and the inside, right? Because when people are purchasing and having transactions, ultimately it has to come back to the internal network for processing and all of those things, right? So because it needs to funnel back here in order to bill and have credit card transactions and inventory and all of that good stuff, the warehouses and so on. So what do I need to protect? I need to protect these guys, right? So I also need to have a prevention here, and I will put it right here. Okay. Can I do away with that? I might not even need an IPS there. I can put, most company, you know what they put? They put a Wholespace, right? System right at the web and the application server, the database, those are right there. Those are software they're going to use.
Which is AWS, right?
No, so they just use an application. You have some open source one that's pretty good. You can buy one. So like your security software, they put those there. Okay. But it's a little bit more advanced in that it's tracking things a little bit better. So you can put Wholespace stuff on that side with a smaller scale. You don't have to buy an appliance. On the inside, on the internal side, what do? You can put in a prevention system. What I would do is I would put it here after the firewall. Why is that? Because the firewall is already screening, right? You already have that screen coming through. You have a network intrusion detection that sounds off in case you have some kind of network events. But you want to focus on some of your servers and things like that and prevent people from getting to your server. So I will put the IPS on the inside a little bit more, okay? So ultimately, where are you connecting to the switch, right? And how that branch segment out in the network is really important. So you have to logically think about where the data is flowing into and where it's leaving from, and that's essential, okay? Because a lot of people, they just put it like right at the edge, right? You know, that's a problem. If you put a lot of appliances that filter there, what happens? You bottleneck, okay? Because if you filter and then filter again, it delays the process because it has to check everything, right? Think about like if you go through like, I don't know, if you ever travel to the country, if you go through border check and then another stop and then another stop, you're just gonna have a huge line, okay? So physically, you're gonna have that. And everybody has to go through 4 or 5 screenings. So that might not be a good solution. Yes, do you want to have a question?
Can you like example, like you said you used to work in this, right? Like give an example like certain businesses that would like to
Yeah, so
e-commerce, right? You said e-commerce.
right. So e-commerce, even education institution like this, right? You have to ask yourself, what kind of data do I need to protect? Right? So student transcript, financial aid information, private information, So now if they cloud a lot of those things, they still have to protect the cloud server that they rent, right? AWS, because at least 50 to 80% is your responsibility in security. When you lease people's stuff, it's kind of like, you ever rent a storage, right? They give you a lock and a key. If you leave it open and your stuff is gone, that's up to you. Same thing with cloud, right? You rent a server space, you manage it. Sometime in the contract, they can help you manage some of that, but they're not fully liable. So if you're getting attacked, that's your fault, right? It's just on their server. They protecting their physical and some of the logical connection to their server, but they're not fully responsible for your data. So this is why when Cloudflare, when they lost like 4 something million records, right? Or even T-Mobile, guess what happens? There's nothing they can do, right? Because if it goes into another entity, that entity say, hey, it's your data. We just give you the hardware to store it. You have to manage it. Because people always argue that, oh, cloud belongs to this cloud company. No, it's really your contract. So focus on what makes your money and what kind of data and how does the data go is really important. So here it gives you a little bit more information about the false positive and false negative. We need to know what a 0-day exploit is. What's a 0-day exploit?
Stuff that you can, exploits that you can use on immediate launch.
Yeah, so let's say that Microsoft is releasing an application like tomorrow, right? And all software has some form of vulnerability, whether sometimes they implement a backdoor for their developers to go in and modify things, or in some cases there's bug, right? We know that there's always bug in software. Nothing is 100%. So, and it's documented, so people already know the vulnerability. So all software companies, they track their vulnerability and posting it, so that way they can fix it, right? These updates and patches, that's what they're designed to do, is to fix the security. That's the security entries, right? CVEs, that's documented. So existing vulnerability, so at the day, right, of the launch, which is the 0-day, somebody already wrote, right, scripts or tools that's going to exploit it. Going through the back door to obtain information or, escalate privileges and so on. It happens a lot, right? And sometimes you have internal leak with software design or tools design or things like that that can prevent. So when you're looking at like high clearance stuff with the military, right? People don't give out information about bombers and planes and tanks and things like that, right? Those are being bought and sold by people, okay? So sometimes internal engineers and people are bought and sold. I attended a conference with DOD and NSA, professors, researchers, you name it, right? There are other governments that actually buy them. And so that way they would leak information and sell their design or with their research to other entities. And so even with people who pass clearances, so there's always like a trust issue, right? Okay. So what you would consider is how can I fix this problem? Not 100%, but how can I fix a 0-day exploit? What do you guys think?
Maybe day one patch.
Yeah, so it's gonna take you time, right? At least a day 1 patch. So you have to wait at least a day, or when the software company release the fix. Okay. And also like just to, you can test some of the things, you can identify some of the bugs in the issue, but this is why this field is like, it's a continuous wheel, right? You can never fix everything 100% because the design there is flawed. Okay. So here it gives you some false positive, false negative information. It also shows you a little bit, see how they put the NIDS here. That's a network intrusion prevention system. And then you got to put it on the inside. So why do I need to put it on the SCADA? You know what those are? That's a system that control, like, especially places like this, air conditioning for the whole facility, electrical power for the whole, like if you work in warehouses, even Walmart, university, a lot of these companies, they have a system that control. So when you turn on the light, you don't have to run all the way to that building to turn on the light, right? You can turn on air conditioning centrally through a system, and SCADA is really important, okay? Because that's how they can get through your network too, okay? Is through your resources. So now, what can I do as a damage if I access SCADA? If, what happens if there's no power? Is there computer? No, right? No power, no computer, no air conditioning, no people, no assets, right? If a store, right, no power, no air conditioning, people, it's starting to get hot. People, customer don't stay, right? So a lot of the times that you go for the big fish as an attacker, and so when you think about that, you have to think about how you're going to be able to protect your network from a point of an attacker, okay? So what are the targets? This is a target, number one, right? That's critical. So you rank them by score. What's another target?
Internet.
Authentication server is another target. Right? No user, nothing. And then some might be some internal system, but there's some stuff on the outside, the DMZ right there. You got some mail server going. Yeah, email can be down for a day. It's not a big deal. So it's not as critical, right? So your authentication server, your SCADA, there might be other servers that's internally.
So when you're building the systems, you have to think like a hacker, like, oh, I'm gonna hack this.
Well, you have to identify where is your critical area for your data, right? What would you need to protect the most? And so if you use a matrix, you would rank them by score, right? What is the most critical? 5 points. What's the least critical? 1 point. And you will go down the list and you start identifying how you're going to be able to protect it. We'll do some quantitative stuff later on for risk analysis. Okay. All right. So let's answer some of the next few questions. So next we're going to talk about SSL and TLS. So we understood from last chapter that SSL can be used to remotely connect to anything. Your cloud server, right? You can use it to connect directly to your switch in your appliance. That's how we can, I can control it physically right next to it using SSL. We can terminal in using SSL. Or I can remotely connect to my servers from home using SSL. So we can use that as part of our VPN networks and other things too, right? So when you're using HTTPS to pay your bill, right? When you authenticate to Canvas and, WebAdvisor, etc., you're already using, right, SSLTLS. So all the HTTPS website, that's in the back is your SSLTLS. All right, TLS is probably like more common now than about 10, 15 years ago. So why is this important compared to regular HTTP website? HTTPS, the traffic is encrypted, okay? I'm doing a lecture on HTTP and HTTPS programming with my Python classes, and they're gonna see actually the difference from the back. And this is the class for the cybersecurity side, but in Python, so they can see a little bit more on the perspective of how the tools are built in scripting. Okay. So TLS traffic is encrypted web traffic. Now, when we get into encryption a little bit more, I'll explain it more. So the way web is, it streams encryption, right? And you might, it might sound like it's a lot, but it's just a stream process versus a chunk encryption where you would see with Bitcoin and some of the other ones where that it took a lot more resources, it's slower. So that means that bit by bit it would stream, and it would only generate that when you go into a session when the server responds and serve the resources after you authenticate. Okay. So when I log into my bank account, I put in my username and password or fingerprint or whatever it is. Once that's activated, it gives me a certificate that says that I have access to these resources on their server. And with that, the server would give me the option, so it creates what's called a session. Okay, and that session is just a recorded, right? It's a way what's allowed for the user to. So if I need to process like transactions, like transfer funds, pay my bills, and so on, right? It's part of the session. On the client side, you have a cookie. So what happens when you delete your cookie? So the cookie stores what? Your account information, some kind of credential, right? Username and password. So if you're using like those password saving application, it refers to your cookie to do that, right? But the cookie is really designed to do what? To be able to save information about what the client is requesting to that server. So can they poison your cookie? They sure can, right? That's a file. Can they modify the session and divert it? They sure can, right? If you understand the HTTP process, that can happen too. So many ways we can see that potentially there are aspects of the way we use our system to communicate with another system that has flaws. And these flaws can be played out, and so therefore you would see all of these type of attacks. Okay, so in the next part of the chapter, it touches on that, okay? So when you're using TLS traffic, it tells you here that place it as close as possible to the related devices, because even though, you know, it's not a heavy form of encryption, it is going to reduce some of the heavy duty if you put them in a similar area. Okay. And you need to manage keys. So for the secure session. Okay. And almost all the secure sessions that you would see, right, is web-based. So you have to manage keys and certificates with your authentication server. All right. Next, it talks about SSL Decrypter. Okay. This is used with the prevention system. The prevention system, it's different than the NIDS in that it can see, right, the encrypted traffic. Okay, so in the case that if the attacker uses encrypted traffic, it can see and block it, whereas the network detection system doesn't see the encrypted traffic. It'll just let it pass by. Okay, so SDN is software-defined networks. This is a way that we can use to separate, right, planes or network segments. A good way to do this is to set up virtual LANs through, you know, you don't have to do it through appliance. You can do it through software, but that way we can control who has access to what, right? And then honeypot's been around forever. So to lure the bees, right? And so if now keep in mind that where you place this is really important. If you place it in the wrong area, you're gonna lure them in, and they're gonna. So what they normally do is they would isolate that part of the network, and we can do it via separate network mask, right? Put a bunch of filtering system in, or we can even virtualize it and do it through via virtualization too. Okay, just to make sure that they can't trace all the way back. Everything in your network, just know this. Everything that's connected to the main network, there's a way back in, right? So you gotta make sure that the way in and out that area, right, whether it's through the router, the firewall, whatever it is, okay, you have to make sure that it's not open, okay? So make sure that we observe, we monitor, we prevent, and even though, you know, so what can I throw on there? We can throw things like password looking files, right? And the book talks about that, honeyfile. We can put some fake user on there to lure them, okay? You know, now attackers, they can even go through printer. So, you know, you gotta be, they are creative. So if you give them time, okay? So this is a way to test, right? the weakness of your network without having to pay for a consultant sometimes. Okay. But remember, okay, make sure that, you know, there's a will, there's always a way. Just make sure that we protect. Okay, so here it talks about the honeyfile, and it talks about honeynets, which is a group of honeypots that's put together. So in a large enterprise, sometimes they have that. Microsoft does it all the time. You guys ever seen those websites that show you live attack, like Vikings and NIDS, right? So if you visit, I'll pull it up later on so I can show you, right? You're going to see a lot of people launching attack against the United States, right? From coast to coast, California and some part of the East Coast. A lot of the time it's actually not California, it's north, it's Washington, Seattle, those areas, okay? And then, so you can see the type, so sometimes they will put up like these type of networks and to lure. Okay, so for telemetry, this is a way that would use statistic or measurement to be able to process something, like when they're drilling for natural gas, okay? This type of data can cause a lot of damage to some of like the resources that we use, power, gas, right, oil, things like that. So what they would do is they would use what's called a fake telemetry, and it is a corrupted form of data, right, to tell your system that, you know, instead of drilling at this, right, it's going to be different. So that way it won't go through. So it's a form of denial of service or a form of like, you know, disruption. Okay. So we talked about how we can use honeypot, and then a file that you can use. You can make something like a password.csv, right? CSV is it's like it looks like an Excel, and sometimes that would be useful in a database or .text file. So you can use a type of file, or you can use a file name to lure them. Okay. And then for number 6, it asks you, how can an attacker cause a system disruption with telemetry? They're going to use fake or inaccurate telemetry. And it's just a corrupted data set that caused the system to not respond as it should. Okay. All right, next we're going to talk about wireless. Any question? Okay. So let's touch on wireless a little bit. So 802.11 and wireless is definitely with us almost always now, right? Back in the day, wireless is like a luxury. Okay. You know, most people didn't have wireless back then. Now every household have wireless. And because the technology that we implemented today able to give us farther range, more reliability in the signal, right? But network design is, you know, I remember when I was training long ago, and they were like, oh, don't implement wireless network because it's so unsecure, right? Because the encryption that we use back then is not secure. The encryption we use now is better in security, but there's always also a risk, right? There's a risk in everything. So we want to make sure that we are monitoring, right, the type of ports that we're using, especially at home. I know some of you game, and some of the game you play needs port forwarding, right? So you have to set up your wireless router to forward, right, certain traffic into a different connection, right, with a different port number as a value. Or sometimes you have to open things up in order for some things to work. And that's the same thing in a business, right? We might use, you know, some kind of transactional system that requires this and this and this. And so we have to make sure that we monitor and control. And, you know, in the physical space, wireless is definitely a convenient, okay? But at the same time, somebody can also attack you from a wireless because your router, right, if you set it to always advertise SSID beginning, then it's always gonna be viewable or seen. Okay. And then your guest network, if you enable that, that's gonna become a problem because somebody can join your guest network and look at all the activity that's happening in that guest network, right? So we have to make sure that we think about security and authentication and access management. That's the key, okay? In every part of security is access management.
Those Wi-Fi, what do they call them? Extenders? No.
Uh-huh.
You know, this, when it loses signal, right?
So extenders are just repeater, right? They name it amplifier. So what it does, it takes your signal, right, and relay it across. But when it amplifies it, it just intensifies the frequency so that way it can go further, right? Most of those don't work well because you have so many interference. If your house already has weak signal in an area, it's because of a few things. There could be metal plates in the wall, right? There could be other things. So how can you divert signal? You can use water and glass. You ever go into a company and you see all of a sudden there's a fountain in the middle, right, with glass wall? Why do you think that is? Not just for prettiness.
It helps flow everything, right?
So if I want to shield out some of the signal, right, from the inside to the barrier on the outside, like at the hospital, I put something like that. Okay. Not for feng shui, but for make sure that we protect. So you can use jammer and things like that. So what jammer does is it takes that signal and it deteriorates it. This happens at the stadium, so people don't stream. Or you ever go to a concert? Like I used to work like down the street from Coachella, right? And so when it's crazy, my students on CME, they used to work at Coachella all the time, right? But they would record things for day 1, day 2, and they can share when they leave. But now they stream live on their website. You just have to subscribe, right? But before you cannot stream. If you ever go like watch football, basketball game, you're trying to stream from your phone, guess what happens? Right? You can record, everything's normal. It looks like it's normal signal, but your signal doesn't connect to social network beyond certain point, right? So they can use ways to really bounce the signal or and also we can also use that to read the signal. So wireless and Bluetooth is definitely vulnerable to certain things. So an access point is your router at home, okay? But keep in mind that an AP has routing capability. All wireless router has an access point capability, but not all access point have a wireless router capability. So when you buy devices, right, it would say a wireless router / access point. That's all in one device. But if you ever drive around downtown, like Riverside, you see this access point on there. Those are not routers, they're access points, right? They're like this bulky looking thing that's mounted right at the pole next to the street, right? Those are just for public internet access. So those are not router, they're just access points, okay? I thought I saw, oh, they don't have one in here. But also if you go around the campus, you see they do have access points. So now the difference between the fat and the thin access point is that the fat is a standalone. This is autonomous. It's often used in industrial or industrial area, okay? And a thin access point, they all have antennas, either built in or on the outside. The thin access point, this is controller based. This is what we use in the network, right? So when you connect, you have a switch, okay? And that switch is connecting to all your access points. Even when you isolate those ports and make them separated from the rest of your network, it still physically has to connect to a switch that connects to your main router, that connects to your internet service provider, okay? Can you make a network that's 100% wireless? Not 100%, maybe 95%, okay? But because your backbone has to be wired, okay? It's gonna have higher throughput. Okay, so when you're using AC at home, you have two bands, for 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. the majority of your devices, your smart TV, your Nintendos, right? Even though it's capable of doing AC, the majority of your frequency is gonna live in 2.4. Okay, because 2.4, when you have lower frequency, you're gonna have longer range signals. Okay, that means that I can put my TV downstairs and it still be able to detect my wireless router upstairs because it's using 2.4. Now, if you're using 5 gigahertz, if you switch it, the frequency is higher, your signal is definitely more intense, but distance-wise, it's shorter range. Okay, so you are going to be limited to that. Why is that important for us? Because the farther you are from the source, the less signal you're going to get, right? You have to either amplify it or put another access point by overlapping the signal. But you can choose which frequency you want to use. So most network administrators, they would throw everything on 2.4 because it just gives them wider range. Like a bunch of people in different cubicle, right? You don't have to put a lot of the many access point in a long building. You just have to put a few. Okay. Huh? Everything is 5G supported. Not everything is 5G.
So like
everything mostly is 5G supported. There's some infrastructure still not supporting 5G, but
those antennas that look like trees are 5G or 2.4?
Cell towers that look like palm tree.
What are they?
So they're cell towers. That's different. So they could be part of the 5G network. Okay. But your mobile phones, even though you're using, like I use 5G now, right? But some networks still don't support fully 5G. They're integrated, okay? Like Verizon, they announced that they did that, right? T-Mobile for most part is 5G, right? You ever drive somewhere out in the rural and then it's all of a sudden it's like less than 4G, right? It'll tell you on the signal on your phone. So not all our networks is fully 5G integrated. There's some part of the world is mostly 5G integrated, which is impressive, right? Okay. So, but we in North America, we have a little bit of compliance and regulations, especially when it deals with electronic signal and, you know, because of health reasons. And so there's more restriction on our side compared to other continents. So you see Asia and Europe implementing technology before because they don't have a lot of the rules regulation against some of these things. Okay, but technology, we came up with a lot of the technology, just we're slowly implementing for safety reasons.
Are there any studies like health-wise from those countries?
Oh yeah.
The technologies affecting people?
Yeah. Well, you know, when you're around a lot of microwave signal, there's always a concern, right? And so when you have a lot of these wireless signals, it's impacting. You know, if you stand next to a microwave a long time, people say you have cancer. You use a lot of wireless devices, you know, but, you know, like, is there a consistent study? Not quite, you know, so. Okay, so the band is here, the thing is here, but what I want to share with you is also your channels. Okay, this is good to know, okay? Channel 1 is going to be 2.4 gigahertz. Okay. And then there are 3 separate channels, 1, 6, and 11. If you look at your wireless router, that's what you're going to see. Okay. Those are not overlapping. And then, so when you're using your 802.11b, which is older technology, these are also older technology. On the later 802.11 standard, you would see channel 3 and 11. So on your new router, it's capable of having more channel because it has backward capability with the older standards, where some of the old standards cannot work with some of the newer standards. Okay. So here we started out with this, and then we integrated G and N. That's where WPA and WPA2 start to come in. And then the N is right before the AC, which is, I want to say, 5-7 years ago, N kind of left. And then we have the AC now. And there are new standards that have been developed, which just need to be tested and integrated by IEEE. Okay, so you know there are specific requirement in how, so you can change your channel and set it up so that way you can use it, but you know, so in your router you can set up like certain part to use certain channel and what type of channel and the frequency to go with that channel. So we can distribute, right, signal that way. Okay, SSID. This is gonna be the identifier for your router, your AP, we all know that. Make sure we can MAC filter, and we'll do that in the lab, and then also port security. We disable the ports that we don't use, and then we wanna make sure that we monitor, okay? Antenna placement is very important because you have sometimes single direction. So if I have, you know, I buy a new router now, they're on the antenna, right? That means it's 360, they're overlapping, so that way, no matter how you place it, it's still able to send signal, right? But in a business environment, what if I don't want, you know, the doctor's office signal for the wireless to go into the visitor area, right? I would use different directional antenna, okay? So you can place your antenna and be able to divert or direct your signal a certain way, okay? So that's what it's telling you here. And then our rule is always overlapping, okay? So when I started in the field, I was a field technician for a while, right? My job was to install network systems and appliances. And at the time, a lot of people start to integrate some wireless. So I used to use a walkie-talkie, but now we don't use walkie-talkie anymore. We use a cell, and we would use the signal reader. So you, in a large warehouse, when you're installing wireless, you have to go from one end of the building to the other end of the building to really see where your signal dies, okay? And you would know, technically, there's like distance, right? How long is when that signal degrades, and that's where you're gonna mount your access point so it overlaps. So it picks up and it's gonna scope out. So if I install, if you put everything in the hallway like this, what happens to the people? If their desk is on the side, right? No signal, weak signal. This is what happens in office, okay? So instead of putting it in the hallway, what we can do is we can mount it on the ceiling in different part of the building, right? So on top of somebody's office, and then overlapping it. And now you can use your mobile phone, attach it to the wireless, and it actually reads it really well, but they have apps that you can read it too, okay? So, and then when you run the cable, you run it through a drop ceiling. So this one has a drop ceiling, right? It's a fault ceiling, a crawl space, that's some people call it that way. So you would run the cable, attach your access point, drill it down, and then, you know, run it across. So I used to do drops too, like these things that you see in the wall, things like that. So, huh? No, I was small, so they would send me. Yeah, I would call them there, and I would be like, okay, I'm gonna drop a cable down, I'm gonna drill now. Okay. All right, so here, let's finish up, and then, okay. So if a wireless router has, for number 7, what is the difference between access point and a router? All wireless routers are access point, but not all access point are wireless router, right? It doesn't go the other way. So if a wireless router has the standardized 802.11ac, what are the bands and the channel width? Okay, so on the AC router, you're gonna see 20 megahertz, 40, 80, and 160 megahertz. So you always remember it's always gonna double starting from 20. And you're gonna have 2 bands, 2.4 gigahertz, and we talked about the length with that, and then also the 5 gigahertz. So to prevent wireless sniffing, we want to hide the SSID, also change setting. We want to change the default password for your access point on your wireless router, right? Sometimes it's admin, or something like that. So we want to change it. Don't use default settings. Okay, and then we talked about antenna. So how should the wireless antenna be placed? And so you want a place where the mobile devices are being used, and they need to be overlapped in signal. Okay, like what we saw in the little circle area. So they need to be overlapping. Okay, so consider how we want to use the antenna, even though the antenna is omnidirectional, it's all direction, but we want to make sure that our signal are strong. So we want to overlap them. We move up. Now, in the case where we would talk about the type of encryption that will be wireless. So nowadays, when you're using your AC, you want to use WPA2. That's the strongest right now, right? So compared to the legacy WPA was susceptible to password crack, and it's not recommended for wireless. But you can use WPA2. Okay, it's not susceptible to password crack compared to WPA2. Maybe down the line we'll continue to use Linux and use Aircraft NG. I was playing with the module yesterday. Linux, they did away with some of the tools so quickly, like for Kali. So even if you can install it, they change some of the feature on it. So from one version to the next. Okay, so we'll talk about how we can use some of these tools that you can integrate. Okay, and WPA2 is definitely stronger. It's definitely harder to crack. So they would brute force it, of course, or use a dictionary attack or a rainbow attack. I had a security surveillance camera years ago. I had the NIDS system, and it has to use an OpenDNS, a web. Most of these Ring doorbell stuff uses a web front, right? It connects to a server that's on the web. That's why you ever seen like they put up like people recorded footage because it's public and makes that freely available to people. You ever seen that? People put up footage for free because so you waive your right, like all the record. That's why I don't put camera inside my house, because people can see what's in your house, especially if you use this system. But anyway, so one day I was like, something was slow or something like that, and I logged in and I saw that they inject a script onto the interface of my camera. And so I pulled those quickly because I saw in the script it says they're trying to inject and find the passwords. So they can inject into like a form, and that form, because it sends a request, it sends that script, right? And it's going to be inquiring, so, and you hear people being hacked with the camera all the time, right? I've seen videos where like they even talk to the person that got hacked. Yeah. Anything, yes, any IoT. Update your firmware regularly, especially your smart TV. When it says updates, you need to update. Okay. So it talks about PEAP in a wireless network. And this is to protect the channels. And we talked about different type of channels depending on the standard of the 802.11. It allows you to encapsulate and encrypt conversation in a tunnel. So that is going to elevate the security, and so that way you don't have eavesdropping or man in the middle. And then it would require a certificate from on the server in order to establish that communication. And on the Microsoft side, it's going to use MS Chat version 2, which is better than the prior version, for the authentication handshake. The best one right now is for our Kerberos, for the password protection in Microsoft, but compare MS Chat version 2 to version 1. This is a better technology. Any questions? So Bluetooth technology is also a little skeptical. So Aircrack Energy also does Bluetooth, right? You can use it in Kali, or you don't have to. You can install it onto a Linux release and be able to launch it. Their tutorials are generally pretty good too. Okay, so when you use a captive portal, this is a type of solution that forces the client to access the web browser in order to access the network. Okay, you ever seen that? I know they did that here, where if you're on the network, right, you have to agree, where you have to open up your browser, click agree, and then it's gonna allow you to have wireless access. Hotels does that. A lot of free public places for wireless network does that. So it uses what's called a captive portal. So they would have disclaimer agreement, you know, that you're on their network and you are open and accessible to other people seeing what you're running. I've seen a couple of the sessions that people were uploading pictures on their devices, and then other people can scan, and if they use software tools that they can actually see what kind of pictures and images that you sent to that packet. You can also craft packets. So what are some of the form of attacks that you're going to see on the wireless side, right? For the vector, when you can run wireless Wireshark scan, and you can look at your IV value, and they can use that to attack for encryption purposes. They can do an evil twin, which use technology like the Wi-Fi pineapple, where it makes a rogue access point and then it picks up the real one and take over. That's called the evil twin. There's the MFC and also jamming. So there are many forms of wireless attack. The book and the notes talk about that too. So we can implement protection using VPN. And there are different types of VPN. So if you're using like web-based VPN, or I use through my security software company, right? Whether you're using it through McAfee or security software, okay, that will be falling under the TLS with port 443. Many companies don't set up, right, VPNs using IPsec or IP security. This also similar to what we've seen up here is that it creates a tunnel, and it uses encapsulation and tunneling to protect the communication session. It also piggybacks for authentication with SSH. You can also use direct VPN. So there are many forms of VPN, right? The majority that you can pay like $10 for a month or $100 a year for VPN. Those tend to be the web-based with the TLS. Through HTTPS, you authenticate. Okay. Any question with this? We just have a few more to go. So, and we'll talk about our hands-on exercise. Okay, some additional stuff that you will need to know for your Security Plus, which are the TCAP, which is what you've seen in the wireless router configuration. that's like a temporal key for encryption. You can enable that option. TTIP is an dated technology. Try not to use it if you can. The newer technology is called the CCMP. This uses with the WPA2, and the best encryption that you can incorporate with your mobile devices and your wireless is AES. And that came with your, your Apple phone, your Android phones, all of them are capable of using AES option. Okay. Some company would use the pre-share key or enterprise mode. Enterprise mode, each user has to log in. Where pre-share key, it's just like a passphrase that they need to use, which is probably most of you have that at home. Okay. And then the authentication protocol, we touch on the EAP compared to protected EAP. Okay. And that is really integrated for like VPN authentication with remote networks and so on. Okay. There's some attack that I didn't include, which is your Bluetooth attack. There are blue jacking, blue snarfing, and blue juggling. And they're all different. Because Bluetooth, the range is definitely shorter, but I'm not gonna lie, I love Bluetooth. Like now, like I don't think I can live without Bluetooth. I've been using Bluetooth for a long time, and I think the newer standard for Bluetooth is really nice. The story about Bluetooth is it's named after the Viking king. He has blue teeth, right? And so there are, the issues with security, but it's ad hoc in that it jumps, right? Frequency every so often. So they can use tools to be able to hack it as well. So when you're not using Bluetooth, turn it off, okay, because it would be susceptible to scan. Okay, let me see. For NAC, which stands for Network Access Control, this is mostly we need to implement monitoring and inspection. That's the key area. So what do I mean by this? In order for you to connect to my remote network, I need to make sure that you have anti-malware, security software. You have to have your firewall enabled. So those are some of the things that we can implement as we call the health check, right? So when they come to work and they try to attach to the wireless network, and if their system is at risk, it puts us at risk, so they cannot connect if they don't meet the health check. And you can set it up through configuration. If they're outdated and not patched, we're not going to let them on. We don't want them to be attached to the network. So those are some of the things that you can implement as methods, what's called the network access control. Okay. And so some of the rules we can set up, and then we can also set up some of the agents. I show a little bit of this in my 40A, but this area can go a lot deeper in administration. Okay. And then lastly, we have the access services. You have the PAP, the CHAP, the MS CHAP. This is used to be able to manage how you are connecting to remote access. So the olden days, we used the radius server. Nowadays, we use the RAS, which is remote access server, which you can implement VPN technology. Microsoft is still using some of the legacy protocols and so on, but it's definitely integrate with the new appliances that support virtual private network. So we're just connecting through other networks to access our resources. All right, so let's talk about the last couple of things. Okay. So we talked about NAC. We want to monitor and inspect. So I want to show you how you can make a report for your wireless. Your system here have Wi-Fi and LAN, okay, Ethernet connection. So what I want you to do is make sure that you enable it, and I'm on my laptop, so it's a little bit different than yours. But if you right click your Windows button and you can go into settings, right? And then you can search for your network by clicking network and internet and then click Wi-Fi. Okay. You should be able to see available networks. Sometime if your wireless adapter is enabled, it would show up that little pop-up window. So when I click this, you know how you click your system tray, sometimes this shows up, right? So make sure your Wi-Fi is on and then you can click show available networks. So we can connect to RCCD. Wait, let me see. Yeah, I think that's the one I'm connecting to, RCCD. Okay. So far, that's the first part of the next question, right? We're here. Step D on 17. Then you're gonna make sure that you connect to a wireless network. Otherwise, the command doesn't work, okay? Then you're gonna type in CMD, but don't click it yet. You have to run it as an administrator. So search for it and then right click, choose run as administrator. Now the difference between this and a regular CMD is that the path, you're using the system administrator that is directly to system 32 directory, okay? So you see that the path of it is different compared to the regular CMD. It takes you to the user, right under C drive and so on, okay? Then what you're gonna do is after you connect to the wireless network, you can do this for your home use as well. Sorry, I opened up my stuff there. We are gonna do a netsh, okay? And WLAN stands for wireless local area network. And we want to output a report, okay? So you can copy this and then go into here, Control V. And you should see something like that if you're correctly connected to the wireless network. Okay, so what it's gonna do is gonna generate, right, a few things. It's gonna give you the events that happens on that wireless network, the configuration for your wireless adapter, and how it's using the adapter. So you have the IP config, right? System events, kernel events. Remember we talked about EAP, so for authentication events, and so on. And it's gonna crunch that and it's gonna put it into this file. So I'm gonna copy this path. And then I'm going to open up my file manager or a browser. Let's use a browser. And it should take you to a file. Okay. So that report, that's what it looks like at the top. Okay. And it's varied from system to system on how it's connecting to the wireless network. So it gives you your general information about that system, right? The OS, the BIOS information, the user account, your Wi-Fi, and your port connection, your Ethernet adapter, along with your Wi-Fi. It's like doing the IP config, and so on. Okay. So now coming back to what we have to do. After you got your report, right? You're gonna copy the file path from the output in console in your command prompt, open up a browser and paste it onto the URL. It should open up the file. Look at the report and I want you to look for a few information. You're gonna look for how many successes and failures and warning were identified. Sometimes it will have any success or failure, right? If it's newly connected. And then if it gives you the success and the failure, I want you to view it and tell me what kind of information that you're getting from there. So when you're looking at the events, If you scroll halfway down, there's a table under summary and it should tell you whether you have success or failures. So I don't have any kind of track of logs for my success and failures as far as wireless connectivity, but I do have a warning. Okay. And the reason it tells me that the network is disconnected by the driver. So that means that in order to troubleshoot this, I might need to see how I can resolve the driver issue. Okay. So on yours, you can identify the type. Now, if you go down a little further, it actually gives you the event ID and the information related to that. Okay. So if you do this at home on your home computer, you would see a little different as far as data goes. Okay, and the report. So after I had identified that, right, I put down the answer, how many failure or success I recorded, and then what's the description for that. So type up your answer. Any question regarding number 17? Okay, next we are gonna look at Talos. This is owned by Cisco. And so most of the web entity that you see, the larger company like Facebook, YouTube, Google, they are web protected. But there are, we can look at the domain, the reputation, and the type of data, the threat data that's coming through. Now, it's varied from company to the next. Sometimes it's more visible, right? Like, for example, if you're trying to do YouTube or Facebook, you might not find so much. But if you're doing other company, you'll be able to find it. So we are going to use Microsoft.com because they are more visible. Okay. So I want, once you visit that link, I want you to put in Microsoft.com. And it's going to gather some information. So it's going to tell you, and coming back to some of the question and the comment earlier, right? Like, where should I house my data? Where should my central hub be for my enterprise as large as Microsoft? So you do see that they are listed. These, remember that these are just the top city. Not everybody is there, right? There could be more. So we have San Jose, Redmond, Melbourne, Australia, and there are more other entities. Okay. So once you have put in Microsoft.com, okay, you're going to look at the web reputation. Is it trusted or not trusted? Okay. Yes. So trusted is the web reputation. So the ranking based on the email volume is 6. So the higher it is, and if you're not sure, if you put your cursor on the little question mark, I'll tell you. So if 10 is equal to 100% of the world email volume, so they're pretty, that's like 60% of the world email belongs to Microsoft. That's a lot, right? It's pretty high actually. But we're gonna see what kind of email they're gonna get. You see like Nintendo and things like that. All right, so 60%, so 6 is the ranking for the email volume in the world, okay? And then, so we can put 6 there, and then we're trusted for C. How many IP addresses used to send email in Microsoft? And so on that website, so what you're doing is you're gathering information right now about a certain domain, right? So if you go down here, right? Am I going to count everything up? No, it counts it for you. If you go to the bottom, there's 166 in the result. 1 entry for each. Okay. So favorable is not bad or good, right? Trusted is what we want. So there are some trusted entity from these links. So This is the type of traffic that email servers communicate to Microsoft. So those are all the email servers that are communicating, the domain that has email servers that communicate with Microsoft. And Microsoft has 60% of the world's email. So that's a lot of email. Okay. Because might be using outlook.com, live.com, msn.com, right, microsoft.com. So there's sub hierarchy in that. Okay. So you see something like Carnival Cruise, they do a lot of advertisement maybe, right? Costa Rica Cruise, and so on. Okay. And then for the next part, you do see some that would just be numbers without any kind of. So this is for Teams. So they have a lot of messages that's coming through Teams as well. Right? Okay. Almost done. Okay, so now you're gonna click the Who Is tab, and then you're gonna see the details. We want to see the name servers that are listed and to see if they use DNSSEC. And I think we previously touched on this in the last chapter. DNSSEC is a way that we can secure the records on the DNS. So if you go back to your screen here, I hate that they use a black scroll bar on black background, but you can, I guess you can change the background. Yeah.
I create websites on Shopify, and every time I buy a domain name, it always tells me if I want my information to be public. And one of those instances, I didn't mark it for them to not give out my information. And I shit you not, I get messages. I mean, calls every day from people from India.
Right. Because they have software that goes through and just look for domain that, yeah. Yeah, I paid the extra for GoDaddy to secure mine. I have a domain as well, but I don't put anything crazy on there. It's just for my business. So when you click Who Is a record of the IP addresses, the domains, the website, and their server information. And if you look at like Mark Monitor is a company that does protection for web presence. Almost all like technology company, they use Mark Monitor. And then I can issue out the stuff. So the next few questions, these are your server. Those are the Azure. Okay. And those are the DNS servers. So when you access Teams, outlook.com, all of that, right? These DNS actually are the ones that are bringing you to the right web server. Because without DNS, web will not exist. Domain name system. So Who Is always a good service to find out more information about a particular domain. Then we're not doing anything crazy. We're just gathering information. I want you to look to see if they have a DNSSEC. And then that's it. Okay. So it says unsigned. You can find a little bit more information about them always, right? Like volume history and then the owners. So that will be a lot of stuff is going through Salesforce, probably marketing. Microsoft corporations, they own also Salesforce, right? And then, so if I want to discover like the affiliation right now, you're going to have to look at the, which email server communicates with which, searching for the IP and so on. So
all those scam websites, can you look up who the owner is?
Yeah, so Who Is.
And,
Use Who Is services.
Do they always put like their identity, or do they use like
Well, Mark Monitor blocked that, right? They have web company that block it so you can't get the real information. But yes, when they register, they have to use the real deal. But you can pay someone like this to block your information and report abuse and so on. Yeah, I know most tech company they have that. Google, Facebook, YouTube, you know, you name it. Okay, so when we're done, save your work. Don't forget your USB, submit it. Okay. On Wednesday, we are going to use the TP router. I will put them out along with your drive. I downloaded the Kali, that virtual machine that's released through Kali. So you can play with it at home if you do that. The battery's running low. Let me end the session. Any question?